She saved the horse from millions of bees, but had no idea who owned it. Lucy Miller was focused on harvesting honey when the desperate screams reached her ears. Without a second thought, she abandoned her work and ran to check what was happening at the fence dividing her small property from the neighboring farm. It was a horse, a magnificent purebred chestnut stallion thrashing on the ground while an enormous swarm of Africanized bees attacked it mercilessly. The animal whinnied in pain and fear, its body almost completely covered by the furious insects. No workers from Palmetto Farm were in sight, and Lucy knew that within minutes the horse would succumb to thousands of stings if nothing was done. With quick, precise movements, she donned her complete beekeeping suit, grabbed her sprayer with the calming herbal mixture she had learned to make from her father, and some other essential equipment. Years of keeping bees had given her knowledge that few people in the Lexington area of Kentucky's bluegrass region possessed. She approached the animal cautiously. The horse had fallen, exhausted from fighting. With gentle movements, she began, spraying the mixture around, creating a fragrant mist that soon began to calm the bees at the periphery of the swarm. "Easy, my dear, easy," she murmured to the animal while working with absolute concentration. It was a slow process. Using the smoker with the technique her father had taught her when she was still a girl, Lucy managed to make the swarm gradually disperse. Her hands moved with surgical precision, even under the thick protective gloves. It was like a dangerous dance, a ballet where any wrong move could mean not just the death of the animal, but put her own life at risk. After almost an hour of meticulous work, the last bees left the chestnut stallion's body. The animal was breathing heavily, its coat damp with sweat, but it was alive. Lucy examined it carefully, noting that despite hundreds of stings, the horse had a good chance of surviving if it received proper treatment. "I need to find your owner," she said to herself, running her hand affectionately along the animal's neck. That's when she noticed the brand on its flank, an elegant M intertwined with an A. That was the mark of Blue Ridge Stables, a horse breeding farm that was located on the other side of the valley, about 6 miles away. Taking her cell phone from her pocket, she dialed the local veterinarian, Dr. Paul, an old family friend. "Paul, I need you urgently. I have a purebred horse from Blue Ridge Stables that suffered a massive attack from Africanized bees. I managed to disperse the swarm, but it needs immediate care." "I'm coming right away, Lucy. I'll bring the antihistamine and all the necessary equipment," the veterinarian promptly replied. While waiting, Lucy continued caring for the animal, speaking to it in a low, comforting voice, keeping it hydrated with fresh water from a small creek nearby. An hour later, the veterinarian had administered the necessary injections to the horse and was optimistic about its recovery. "You did an incredible job, Lucy. If it weren't for you, this magnificent animal would have died without a doubt," Paul praised as he packed up his equipment. "I've already contacted Blue Ridge Stables. They're sending a team to pick up the horse. Seems it's one of their most valuable animals, a stallion called Thunder King valued at more than $2 million. $2 million? Lucy's eyes widened, impressed. That amount was more than she would earn in decades with her small honey production. "Indeed, and from what I understand, the owner is coming personally to thank you. It's not every day someone saves an investment of that size," the veterinarian smiled. Lucy just nodded, returning to caress the animal. She had never done anything expecting recognition or reward. Her father had taught her that all forms of life deserved respect and care. Paul said goodbye, promising to return the next day to check on the horse's condition if it hadn't yet been transported to the stables. It was almost dusk when Lucy heard the sound of a vehicle approaching. It was a luxury pickup truck followed by a horse trailer. 3 men got out of the truck, but Lucy could only look at the driver, who was walking toward her. Tall, with an athletic build and graying hair at the temples that only accentuated his strong features, the man removed his sunglasses as he approached her. His green eyes, which Lucy knew so well, looked as surprised as hers. "Lucy!" His voice came out almost as an incredulous whisper. The world seemed to stop for a moment. There, standing in front of her, was Anthony Montgomery, the man who had left her waiting at the altar 15 years ago, the man who had shattered her heart and made her swear never to get involved with anyone again. "Anthony," was all she managed to say, feeling weak in the knees and her heart racing. The workers were already heading to the horse to prepare it for transport, leaving the two of them alone in that surreal moment. When they told me the name of the woman who had saved Thunder King, I never imagined it could be you, he said, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture that Lucy still remembered well. It's a small world, isn't it? She replied, trying to maintain her composure despite the whirlwind of emotions overwhelming her, especially when you live in the same valley. I never knew you had returned to the area, Anthony said, briefly glancing away at the horse that his workers were now examining. Dr. Paul told me what you did, said no one else could have saved Thunder King under those circumstances. Lucy shrugged, as if minimizing her feat. Anyone with knowledge about bees would have done the same. No, they wouldn't have, he insisted, taking a step toward her. What you did was extraordinary, Lucy. You saved not just a valuable animal, but one of the last treasures I have left. There was something in his voice, a note of disguised desperation that intrigued Lucy. But she wasn't ready for this kind of conversation, not with Anthony, not after everything that had happened. Well, I'm glad the animal is okay. If you'll excuse me, I have work to do before it gets completely dark, she said, already turning to leave. Wait, please. Anthony's hand on her arm stopped her. A light touch, almost hesitant, but it sent a wave of electricity through her body. At least let me thank you properly. Do you have any idea what you did today? I saved a horse from millions of bees, she answered dryly, as I would for any suffering animal. He smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach his eyes. Always direct. Aren't you? He said, looking at her in a way that made her heart tighten. Thunder King isn't just an expensive horse, Lucy. He's the last hope for my stables. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to hit like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out, now continuing. That information caught Lucy by surprise. Blue Ridge Stables was known throughout the region as an empire, a symbol of success and prosperity. The horses bred by Anthony won national and international competitions, and as far as she knew, the Montgomery family had been swimming in money for generations. Last hope, she repeated, unable to hide the tone of disbelief. What happened to your father's empire? A muscle twitched in Anthony's jaw. A long story, and I don't have the right to take up more of your time, he replied, taking a card from his pocket and extending it to her. But I would very much like to talk if you're willing. Maybe I can repay what you did today somehow. Lucy looked at the card, reluctant. Part of her wanted to throw that piece of paper in his face and tell him to disappear from her life again. But another part, a part she hated to admit still existed, wanted to know what had happened to him all these years. I don't need repayment. Anthony. I did what I had to do, she said, but accepted the card, putting it in her pants pocket. Now, if you don't mind, I really need to go. I have hives to check before nightfall. He nodded, respecting her desire to end that unexpected reunion. Thank you again, Lucy, really. She just nodded and walked away toward her house, feeling his gaze on her back the whole time. Only when she entered and closed the door behind her did she allow herself to tremble and let the tears come. 15 years had not been enough to erase the pain of humiliation, of abandonment. 15 years had not been enough to forget Anthony. Montgomery. The next morning, Lucy awoke to the sound of birds as always. She had slept poorly, her mind filled with memories and unanswered questions. She got up, determined to push those thoughts away and focus on her work. The bees wouldn't wait, and neither would her obligations. After a quick breakfast, she headed to her main apiary, where several hives needed maintenance. It was work she loved, inherited from her father, who had taught her all the secrets of beekeeping since she was little. She had learned to respect bees, to understand their language, their habits. The honey she produced was considered one of the best in the region, proudly sold as Valley Honey Artisanal Production. She was focused on the third hive when she heard the sound of tires on the gravel of her driveway. She sighed, imagining it might be Dr. Paul returning to see how she was doing. The veterinarian was an old family friend and frequently expressed concern about her solitary life. To her surprise, when she turned around, she saw the same luxury pickup truck from the day before. She felt her heart speed up against her will. Why was Anthony here? The horse was already safe, there was nothing more to be said between them. She finished what she was doing, carefully closed the hive and removed her protective veil. She walked slowly toward the entrance of the property, where Anthony was waiting, leaning against his truck. "Good morning, Lucy," he greeted her, removing his sunglasses. He wore simple clothes today, jeans and a button-up shirt, but still emanated that natural elegance he had always possessed. "Anthony," she responded dryly. "What are you doing here?" "I came to bring this," he said, indicating a box on the passenger seat of his truck. "It's just a small token of gratitude for what you did yesterday. I already said I don't need rewards," Lucy retorted, crossing her arms. "It's not a reward, it's a gift," he insisted, picking up the box and extending it to her. "Please, accept it." Reluctantly, Lucy took the box. It was light and had a few small holes in the lid. Intrigued, she opened it carefully and was surprised to find a sophisticated set of beekeeping equipment. A state-of-the-art smoker, special gloves, a complete kit for analyzing honey quality, and other items she had only seen in imported catalogs. "Anthony, this is," she began, genuinely surprised. "It's the least I can do," he interrupted gently. "Thunder King is recovering well, thanks to you. The vet said he's already out of danger, though he still needs a few days of care." Lucy closed the box, torn between gratitude for the equipment that would truly be useful and irritation at feeling like she was being bought in some way. "Thank you, but I still think it's unnecessary." "Do you have a minute to talk?" he asked, ignoring her resistance. "I have a proposal to make." "Proposal?" she repeated, suspicious. "Professional," he quickly clarified. "I saw your work yesterday. You have a gift with bees, a knowledge that's rare to find these days." Lucy hesitated, but her curiosity spoke louder. "All right, 5 minutes. You can talk while we walk to the house," she conceded, starting down the stone path. Anthony followed her, maintaining a respectful distance. "Blue Ridge Stables has been facing difficulties," he began, choosing his words carefully. "It's not what it was in my father's time." "I gathered that from what you said yesterday about the horse," Lucy commented. "Yes, Thunder King is one of the last high-value horses I still own. The truth is, I'm on the verge of bankruptcy, Lucy. Years of poor management by my father, bad investments I made trying to recover what was lost, and now—" He let the sentence hang in the air. "I'm sorry to hear that, Anthony, but I still don't understand what this has to do with me," she said, stopping as they reached the porch of her simple but cozy house. "I have a problem with bees on the property. The attack Thunder King suffered wasn't the first. I've already lost 2 valuable foals in recent months. There are wild hives scattered throughout the farm, and nobody can control them." Lucy was beginning to understand where he was going with this. "And you want me to solve this problem for you?" "I want to hire your services," he corrected, "professionally, removing the dangerous swarms, perhaps even establishing controlled hives in safe areas of the property. You would be well compensated, of course." The proposal was tempting from a financial perspective. Her small honey production was enough to survive on, but not much more than that. A job of this size would represent a significant injection of money. But working for Anthony, seeing him regularly, the idea stirred up feelings she preferred to keep buried. "I need to think about it," she finally responded. "Of course I understand," he said, seeming genuinely understanding. "I know it's complicated. Our past." A heavy silence fell between them, full of unspoken words, explanations never given, dreams shattered on that fateful day 15 years ago. "Why, Anthony?" The words escaped before she could contain them. 15 years of doubts, of sleepless nights, 15 years trying to understand what had happened. "Why didn't you show up that day?" He closed his eyes for a moment as if the question caused him physical pain. "It's a long and painful story, Lucy, and I'm not sure if you really want to hear it. You just asked me to work for you, after leaving me standing at the altar in my wedding dress in front of 200 guests," she said, the hurt evident in her voice. "I think I deserve at least an explanation." Anthony nodded slowly. "You deserve it. You always did," he agreed. "But I don't know if I'm ready to relive all of that. I don't know if you are." 15 years, Anthony," Lucy insisted. 15 years without a word, without an explanation, without an apology. And now you show up here as if we could just do business? He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she knew well. You're right. It was insensitive of me. He hesitated. When I found out it was you who saved Thunder King, something inside me awakened. Like it was a sign, a second chance. Second chance? She repeated, incredulous. For what? To make me suffer again? No, Lucy, never, he responded with intensity. To fix things somehow. To explain what happened when I'm ready. I don't know. Maybe just to be able to look at you and tell you how sorry I am. There was a sincerity in his eyes that disarmed her momentarily. Lucy felt that old connection, that chemistry that had always existed between them, resurfacing as if the years hadn't passed, and that scared her. I'll think about your proposal, she finally said, regaining control of her emotions. Strictly professional. I'll call you in a few days with my answer. He seemed to accept that small gesture as a victory. Thank you, Lucy. That's all I ask for now. Anthony said goodbye with a nod of his head and walked back to his truck. Lucy watched him leave, a whirlwind of contradictory emotions inside her. Anger, curiosity, hurt, and, as much as she tried to deny it, a spark of that old love she had never been able to completely extinguish. She went inside and placed the box with the equipment on the table, an expensive gesture from a man apparently on the verge of bankruptcy. What was really happening with Anthony Montgomery? And why, after all these years, did fate insist on putting him back in her path? The following days passed slowly for Lucy. While tending to her hives, her mind constantly returned to Anthony's proposal and the brief, disturbing reunion they had. Part of her wanted to call him and say she wasn't interested, that he should look for another beekeeper, but another part, perhaps the stronger one, was curious. Curious about what had happened to him during these years, about what had really happened on the wedding day, and mainly about why fate insisted on entwining their lives again. On Wednesday, almost a week after the incident with the horse, Lucy finally made her decision. She picked up the phone and dialed the number on the card Anthony had given her. Hello? His voice answered after 2 rings. Anthony, it's Lucy, she said, trying to maintain a strictly professional tone. I'm calling about your proposal. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line, as if he was surprised she had actually called. Lucy, it's good to hear your voice, he responded, and she could practically visualize his smile. Have you decided? Yes, I'll accept the job, she said firmly, but I have some conditions. Of course, I'm listening. First, I want a formal contract in writing with all the terms well defined. Second, I'll work at my own pace and using my methods. I don't accept interference. Third, our relationship will be strictly professional. I understand and accept all conditions, he responded without hesitation. When could you start? The situation is becoming increasingly critical. Lucy took a deep breath before responding. I can go there tomorrow to make an initial assessment of the property. I'll need to know all the locations where swarms have been spotted and understand the scope of the problem before starting the actual work. Perfect. He seemed genuinely relieved. Could you come in the morning? I can send a car to pick you up if you prefer. That won't be necessary, she responded quickly, wanting to maintain control over the situation. I have my truck. I'll be there at 9. I'll be waiting. And Lucy, thank you for accepting. There was something in his voice, a softness, that brought back memories she preferred to keep buried. She said goodbye quickly and hung up, already questioning whether she had made the right decision. The next morning, Lucy drove the 6 miles that separated her small property from Blue Ridge Stables with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She wore her work clothes, sturdy jeans, boots, a long-sleeved shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat to protect her from the sun. On the passenger seat was her bag with basic beekeeping equipment. As she approached the main entrance to the stables, she noticed significant changes since the last time she had been there, years ago. The elegant entrance, once impeccably maintained with elaborate gardens and an avenue of dogwood trees, now showed clear signs of neglect. The paint on the large wooden gate was peeling, some directional signs were crooked, and the gardens, once meticulously cared for, were growing wild in some spots. She parked in front of the main house, an imposing colonial-style building that dominated the top of a small hill, offering a panoramic view of the entire valley. Even this majestic structure seemed to have lost some of its shine, with some windows closed and areas of the front garden visibly abandoned. Before she could even get out of her truck, Anthony appeared on the porch. He wore riding pants, boots, and a simple shirt with rolled-up sleeves. He looked younger like this, more like the man she had fallen in love with years ago. "Good morning, Lucy," he greeted her, descending the porch steps to meet her, punctual as always. "Good morning," she responded, picking up her equipment bag. "I'm ready to start. Where have the swarms been sighted?" He seemed slightly disappointed with her direct approach, but quickly recovered. "Mainly in the fields on the west side of the property, near the conservation woodlands. That's where we've been losing animals. But first, I'd like to show you something." Lucy hesitated, but her professional curiosity spoke louder. "What?" "Thunder King. He's completely recovered and I'd like you to see him. I think he'd like to thank you personally." Anthony smiled, and there was something so genuine in that smile that she couldn't refuse. "All right, let's see the horse first." Anthony guided her along the path that led to the main stables, a long wooden building with spacious stalls for the horses. As they walked, Lucy noticed other signs of decline. Old equipment that in other times would have been replaced, fences needing repairs, fewer workers than she remembered. "Oh, you weren't joking about the financial problems, were you?" she commented, observing an apparently abandoned tractor in the field. Anthony followed her gaze and sighed. "No, I wasn't. The last 5 years have been challenging. Poor management, bad investments, problems with suppliers, some harvests lost due to extreme weather conditions, and with the economy as it is." He left the sentence hanging, but Lucy understood. Many traditional properties in the region faced similar difficulties. The difference was that Blue Ridge Stables had always seemed invincible, a fortress of prosperity built by generations of the Montgomery family. They arrived at the stables, and Anthony led her to a spacious stall at the end of the corridor. He opened the door, and inside was Thunder King, a magnificent chestnut stallion, standing over 16 hands high with a shiny coat and majestic bearing. Seeing them, the horse approached, moving with the natural grace of a perfectly bred animal. "He's even more beautiful now that he's recovered," Lucy commented, genuinely impressed. "He's my best stallion," Anthony said with evident pride, winner of several prizes, including the Kentucky Derby last year. His genetic value is incalculable. The horse approached the rail, extending his neck toward Lucy. She cautiously stretched out her hand, allowing the animal to smell it. To her surprise, Thunder King gently pushed his head against her hand as if recognizing his savior. "He likes you," Anthony observed, with a gentle smile. "Horses have incredible memories. I believe he remembers what you did." Lucy smiled, despite herself, caressing the animal's neck. "He's a beautiful animal, Anthony. You must be very proud of him." "I am, but—" He hesitated, his expression suddenly more serious. "I'm considering selling him." "Selling him?" She was surprised. "But you said he's your best stallion, an award-winning animal." "And that's exactly why he's worth so much," Anthony explained, passing his hand affectionately over the horse's muzzle. "I have an offer from a breeder in Argentina, enough to pay off some debts and maybe save the rest of the stables." There was genuine pain in his voice, and for the first time since she had met him again, Lucy felt a pang of compassion for him. She knew how much Anthony loved these animals, how much horse breeding was more than a business for him. It was a passion, a way of life. "I'm sorry," she said sincerely. "Thank you," he replied, and his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her quickly look away. "Well, let's get to work," she said, breaking that moment of connection. "I need to see where these swarms are, to start planning the best approach." Anthony nodded, closing the stall door. "Of course. I asked Hank, my foreman, to meet us here. He knows all the problem areas of the property." As if summoned by his name, a middle-aged man wearing a straw hat and rural work clothes appeared at the entrance to the stable. "Boss, has Mrs. Lucy arrived yet?" he asked, approaching. Upon seeing Lucy, he opened a genuine smile. "Mrs. Lucy, it's been so long, do you remember me?" Lucy looked at the man, searching her memory. "Hank, wait, you worked for my father too, didn't you, with the fences and pastures?" "That's right, ma'am," he confirmed, happy to be recognized. "I worked at your father's farm for 15 years, only left after after the accident." The accident? Even after so much time, the mention of her father's death still hurt. He had died in a car rollover exactly 3 months after the day she was supposed to have married Anthony. Many in town said he never recovered from the humiliation his daughter had suffered, and that perhaps he had drunk more than he should have on that fateful night. Lucy noticed that Anthony also seemed uncomfortable with the mention of the accident. "Shall we see these swarms then?" she suggested, wanting to change the subject. "Of course, Mrs. Lucy," agreed Hank. "I have the jeep ready outside. The area where most of the hives are is a bit distant and the terrain is rough." The three headed to the old stable jeep. Hank took the wheel, Anthony sat beside him, and Lucy got in the back seat with her equipment bag. As they advanced through the fields, Lucy observed the property with attentive eyes. There were fallen fences in some places, pastures that needed care, but also signs of a recent effort to keep things running. "How many workers do you still have, Anthony?" she asked. "Only 12, he replied without turning. "We used to have more than 50. Hank here is one of the few loyal ones who stayed even when we delayed salaries. The boss has always been good to us," Hank intervened. "In difficult times, he sold his own luxury cars before thinking of letting anyone go." Lucy absorbed that information with surprise. The Anthony she had known had always been generous, but also attached to the luxury and comfort that his social position provided. The idea that he would sacrifice his own privileges for his employees didn't match the image of the man who had abandoned her without explanation. After about 20 minutes of traveling on increasingly rough dirt roads, they arrived at a transition area between open pastures and a small conservation forest that belonged to the property. Hank stopped the jeep at a safe distance. "It's mainly in this area, Mrs. Lucy," he said, pointing to the edge of the forest. "The horses come to drink water in the creek that passes there and end up disturbing the hives. We've already lost 3 animals in recent months, besides the 2 foals our boss mentioned." Lucy took her binoculars and examined the area carefully. Even at a distance, she could see the movement of bees among the trees. "I can see at least 3 main hives from here," she commented. "Probably Africanized bees, judging from the aggressive behavior you described. I'll need to get closer for a complete assessment, but not today. I need to bring proper equipment." She made some notes in a small notebook, recording her initial observations. "Can you show me the other points where swarms have been spotted?" she asked. During the next 2 hours, Hank and Anthony led Lucy to different areas of the property where there had been problems with bees. She made detailed notes, took some photographs, and collected information about the swarm's behavior patterns. When they finished the inspection, it was almost noon. They returned to the main house where Anthony insisted she stay for lunch. "We need to discuss your action plan and the contract terms," he argued when she hesitated. "And Miss Betsy prepared her southern fried chicken, which is still the best in the region." The mention of the cook who had worked for Anthony's family since he was a child brought an involuntary smile to Lucy's lips. Miss Betsy had been almost a second mother to Anthony after his mother's early death, and Lucy had always loved the food and warmth of the elderly woman. "All right, I accept the invitation," she finally agreed. They said goodbye to Hank, who went to attend to his tasks, and Anthony led Lucy to the side porch of the house where a table was already set for lunch. The view from there was magnificent. The entire expanse of the valley opened up before them, with blue mountains in the background and the river winding through the farms. "The view is still wonderful," Lucy commented, allowing herself a moment of appreciation. "It's one of the few things they haven't been able to take from me," Anthony replied, pulling out a chair for her to sit. The chivalrous gesture so characteristic of him caught her by surprise. For a brief moment it was like going back in time, as if the 15 years of separation had never existed. She sat down, uncomfortable with the ease with which old habits could resurface. A motherly-looking woman with grey hair tied in a bun appeared, carrying a tray with a pitcher of fresh lemonade. "Mrs. Lucy," she exclaimed upon seeing her, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. Good heavens, it's been so long. Look how beautiful you are, child. Miss Betsy, Lucy stood up to hug the woman, genuinely happy to see her. You haven't changed a bit. Nonsense, I'm old, full of arthritis, laughed the cook, returning the hug with affection. But my heart warmed up knowing you came back, and saving Thunder King on top of that. That's a miracle from God. Lucy smiled, touched by the woman's affection. Miss Betsy had always treated her like family during the years she had dated Anthony. I made my special southern fried chicken, announced Miss Betsy proudly. And that bread pudding you liked so much for dessert. You didn't need to go to all that trouble, said Lucy, genuinely moved. What trouble? It's a pleasure to cook for someone who appreciates it. Besides, the woman lowered her voice as if she were going to tell a secret. This young man here has been needing some joy in his life. Since the Colonel, well, since the problems, he hardly smiles. This morning he was already different, more animated. Miss Betsy, please. Anthony intervened, visibly embarrassed. The cook gave Lucy a conspiratorial wink. I'll bring the food. You two talk all you want. When the woman left, an awkward silence fell between them. Lucy took a sip of lemonade, trying to organize her thoughts. She's still the same, she finally commented, breaking the silence. Yes, thank God, Anthony agreed. Miss Betsy is practically the heart of this house. I don't know what would become of me without her, especially after my father passed away. Lucy looked up, surprised. Your father passed away when? 3 years ago, he replied, his expression becoming more serious. Pancreatic cancer. It was quick, at least. He didn't suffer much. I'm sorry, she said sincerely. Despite never having liked Colonel August much, Anthony's father, known for his authoritarian temperament and antiquated views, the loss of a father was something she understood deeply. He died believing I had ruined the family legacy, continued Anthony, looking at the landscape in front of him. And perhaps he's right. I inherited an empire, and I'm losing it. There was a vulnerability in his voice that Lucy had never heard before. The Anthony she had known was confident, sometimes even arrogant, always convinced that success was his birthright. What happened exactly? She asked, curiosity momentarily overcoming her reserve. Anthony hesitated, as if considering where to begin. Many things. My father made risky investments in the last years of his life, betting on a market that collapsed. When I took over, we were already having serious liquidity problems. I tried to diversify, modernize the stables, but every decision I made seemed to worsen the situation. He paused, his gaze lost in the landscape. And then came the drought of 2021. We lost almost half the animals, had to sell land to survive. The bank started to pressure, the creditors too. Lucy absorbed that information in silence. It was difficult to reconcile the image of the stables in decline with the memories she had of the place. Prosperous, imposing, seemingly indestructible. Miss Betsy returned at that moment, bringing the famous southern fried chicken that filled the air with its delicious aroma. She served the plates generously and left again, leaving them alone. They ate in silence for a few minutes, Lucy genuinely enjoying the food that brought back so many memories. Finally, she decided to return to the professional subject that had brought her there. About the work with the bees, she began. I'll need at least 2 weeks to completely remove all the swarms I identified today. I'll bring my own equipment, but I'll need help at some points, especially for installing the new hives in suitable locations. Anthony seemed relieved by the change to a more neutral subject. Hank and 2 other workers will be at your disposal whenever you need. And as for your compensation, we can discuss that after I deliver a formal proposal, she interrupted him. First, I want to finish my assessment. So of course, he agreed, seeming slightly disappointed with her strictly professional approach. But I have one more thing to propose. Lucy raised an eyebrow, already suspicious. What? Besides removing the existing swarms, I'd like you to consider establishing a professional apiary here at the stables, he said, leaning slightly toward her. We could create a line of honey as a parallel business. Diversifying is the key to survival these days. The proposal caught her by surprise. An apiary at Blue Ridge Stables? The concept was interesting from a commercial point of view, but it would mean a long-term involvement with Anthony. It would be a considerable investment for you, at a time when you said you're having financial difficulties, she observed. I have a small fund reserved for new ventures, he explained, and it would be a partnership, not just a service. You would bring the technical knowledge, I would contribute the land and part of the initial investment. We would share the profits. Lucy considered the proposal while finishing her meal. Part of her was tempted. The idea of expanding her business was attractive, and Blue Ridge Stables had perfect conditions for large-scale beekeeping. But another part, perhaps the more sensible one, warned of the risks of associating professionally with someone who had hurt her so deeply. I'll think about it, she finally responded. For now, let's focus on removing the existing swarms. I can start on Monday if that works for you. Perfect, Anthony agreed, seeming satisfied that she hadn't immediately rejected the idea. And as for the contract, I have a draft prepared for your review. He got up and went into the house, returning moments later with a folder that he handed to her. I reviewed it with my lawyer, but I'm open to any changes you want to make. Lucy took the folder and placed it beside her chair, promising herself she would read every line carefully. Thank you for lunch, it was delicious, she said, standing up. But I need to go now, I have my own hives to tend to this afternoon. Anthony also stood up. Of course, I understand. I'll walk you to your car. They walked side by side in silence to where Lucy's truck was parked. The contact with the past through Miss Betsy, the familiar fried chicken, the view of the valley. Everything had stirred her emotions more than she would like to admit. Until Monday, then, she said, opening the door of her truck. Until Monday, he replied. There was something in his eyes, an unformulated question, a desire to say more, but he merely waved briefly and stepped back, allowing her to leave. As she drove back to her property, Lucy felt the weight of memories and new possibilities fighting inside her. 15 years ago, she had promised herself she would never allow Anthony Montgomery to have any influence in her life again. Now, fate seemed determined to test that resolution. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to hit like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out. Now continuing. On Monday, Lucy arrived at Blue Ridge Stables at exactly 8 in the morning as agreed. This time her truck was loaded with all the equipment necessary to start the work of removing the swarms. She had spent the weekend reviewing the contract, which was surprisingly fair, and mentally preparing herself for the intense days of work ahead. She was greeted by Hank, who informed her that Anthony had needed to go to the neighboring town for a meeting with bankers, but would be back in the afternoon. He apologized for not being here to receive you and said that the boys and I are completely at your disposal, the foreman explained. Lucy felt a mixture of relief and disappointment at Anthony's absence. On one hand, it would be easier to concentrate on work without his disturbing presence. On the other, there were still unanswered questions, interrupted conversations that part of her wanted to continue. No problem, Hank, she replied, pushing these thoughts away. Let's start with the swarm near the creek, which seems to be the most aggressive. With the help of Hank and 2 other workers, Lucy transported her equipment to the point where they had spotted the hives on Friday. She put on her complete protective suit and instructed the men to keep a safe distance while she made a more detailed assessment. She cautiously approached the first swarm, which was housed in the hollow trunk of an old tree. As she had suspected, they were Africanized bees, more aggressive and territorial than European ones. Working with the calm and precision that made her a respected beekeeper, she began the process of pacifying the swarm using her special smoker and the herbal mixture she had developed over the years. The work was slow and required absolute concentration. Each movement had to be calculated, each decision based on years of experience and the careful observation of the bee's behavior. Once in a while, she gave precise instructions to Hank and the other men, who assisted her with a mixture of admiration and apprehension. By noon, she had managed to contain the first swarm and was transferring it to a mobile hive she had brought with her. The bees, now calmer, allowed her manipulation without massive attacks. Hank brought lunch, sandwiches and juice prepared by Miss Betsy, and they rested in the shade of a large tree while they ate. "You're really amazing with those bees, Mrs. Lucy," commented one of the young helpers, looking with respect at the now pacified hive. "I've never seen anything like it. "It's knowledge and practice," she replied, minimizing the compliment. "My father taught me since I was little. Bees are fascinating and predictable creatures when you learn to understand them. Boss Anthony said you saved Thunder King from a furious swarm with your bare hands," continued the young man, clearly impressed. "Said he'd never seen such courage." Lucy felt her cheeks warm, uncomfortable with Anthony's indirect compliment. "I just did what anyone with my knowledge would do," she said, wanting to change the subject. "How is the horse, by the way?" "Completely recovered," replied Hank with a smile. "He's a strong animal. The boss even cancelled his sale after what happened." "Cancelled?" Lucy asked, surprised. "I thought he needed the money." Hank and the other men exchanged glances, as if they had said more than they should have. "Well, the boss changed his mind after you accepted to work here," explained Hank, choosing his words carefully. "Said we might have other options now." Lucy frowned, intrigued by this information. What would her presence have to do with Anthony's decision not to sell his most valuable horse, especially in a time of financial crisis? She didn't have time to ask more, as they finished lunch and it was time to get back to work. During the afternoon, she continued the process of containing the second swarm, which was installed in a crevice between rocks near the creek. This one proved more challenging, requiring all her concentration and skill. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice Anthony's arrival until he approached, maintaining a safe distance, but close enough to observe her. He wore riding clothes and seemed to have come directly from the stable to see her. "Impressive," he commented, when she finally noticed his presence. "You make it look so natural." Lucy felt that familiar flutter in her stomach upon seeing him, but maintained her composure. "Years of practice," she replied simply. "How was your meeting?" Anthony shrugged, a gesture that contradicted his apparent unconcern. "As expected. The banks want more guarantees, more interest, more time for payment on my part, and less time for debt execution on their part." There was a bitterness in his voice that surprised her. The Anthony she had known was always optimistic, confident, almost arrogant in his certainty that everything would work out. "Did you get what you wanted?" she asked, genuinely curious. "An extension of the deadline, at least," he replied, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of weariness. "I have 6 more months before more radical decisions." Lucy didn't know what to say. Part of her, a petty part she wasn't proud of existing, felt a certain satisfaction in seeing the proud Anthony Montgomery facing difficulties. But another part, perhaps larger, felt genuinely concerned for the man who had been so important in her life. "I'm sure you'll find a solution," she finally said, turning her attention back to the bees. Anthony took a step forward, still maintaining a safe distance. "May I observe?" he asked. "I promise not to interfere." She hesitated only for a moment. "Sure, as long as you stay where you are. These are African bees, extremely aggressive." He nodded and remained silent, watching as she worked. There was an intensity in his gaze that she could feel, even without looking at him directly. It was disconcerting, but also strangely comforting to have his attention and admiration. When the day came to an end, Lucy had managed to contain and transfer 2 of the main swarms. It was good progress for the first day. As she packed her equipment, Anthony approached again. "I saw you brought hives for transfer," he commented, indicating the wooden structures she had brought. "Does that mean you're considering my proposal about the apiary?" Lucy closed the last compartment of her truck before answering. "I'm considering all options," she said cautiously. "These are for the swarms I'm removing now. They need to be kept somewhere before we decide their final destination." "We decide?" he repeated, a smile forming on his lips. "That sounds like a potential partnership." She noticed her slip. "That's not what I meant, just—" "Lucy," he interrupted her gently, "I understand your hesitation. I know I don't have the right to ask for your trust, not after what happened, but professionally speaking, I think we could create something extraordinary together." There was a sincerity in his voice, a vulnerability in his eyes that disarmed her momentarily. This wasn't the same man who had abandoned her 15 years ago, or at least he didn't seem to be. "Let's finish removing the swarms first," she replied, seeking refuge in the practical approach. Then we'll discuss possible future business. He nodded, accepting her answer. Have dinner with me tonight? He asked suddenly. Nothing formal, just a meal to discuss the day's progress. Lucy felt her heart speed up. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, eager for more time in his company, more opportunities to understand what had really happened all those years ago. But the cautious part, the one that had built walls around her heart, sounded an internal alarm. I think it's better not to, she finally replied. It's been a long day and I still have my own hives to check when I get home. The disappointment on his face was evident, but he recovered quickly. Of course, I understand. Tomorrow at the same time, then? I'll be here, she confirmed, getting into her truck. Good night, Anthony. Good night, Lucy, he replied, stepping back so she could maneuver. During the drive back home, Lucy found herself repeatedly thinking about Anthony, about how he seemed different from the man she kept in her memories. More vulnerable, more human in a way. The arrogant young man she had known, so sure of his place in the world, so confident in his brilliant future, seemed to have been replaced by a man who carried the weight of failures and responsibilities. And that, she realized with some alarm, made him even more attractive in her eyes. The following days established a routine. Lucy arrived early at the stables, worked intensely on removing and transferring the swarms, always assisted by Hank and the other workers. Anthony appeared at different times of the day, sometimes to observe her work, other times to bring her fresh water or some snack prepared by Miss Betsy. With each visit, he found a reason to talk, to tell something about the years they had spent apart, to ask about her life. They were fragments of information: how he had studied business administration, how he had taken full control of the stables after his father's death, how he had tried to modernize the operation, or questions about when she had returned to the region, how she had learned advanced beekeeping techniques if she was happy with her life. Lucy found herself responding with increasing openness, telling about her return 8 years ago, after the death of her father, to take care of the small property that was all that remained of what had once been a prosperous farm. How they had lost almost everything while she was away, studying biology in New York, trying to rebuild her life after the failed marriage. How beekeeping, the knowledge inherited from her father, had become her refuge and livelihood. It was a cautious dance, a mutual recognition that there was much to be said, but also much to be protected. Neither of them directly mentioned the wedding day, the explanation that never came, the abandonment that had changed the course of her life. On Thursday, when Lucy had already successfully removed 6 of the 8 main swarms, an unexpected storm surprised them. The sky darkened quickly, and soon thick drops of rain began to fall, accompanied by thunder and lightning. "We have to find shelter," shouted Anthony, who was with her at that moment. "The old barn is the closest place." Quickly grabbing the essential equipment, they ran toward a wooden structure about 200 yards away. They arrived soaked, breathless, but safe from the storm that was now pouring down with full force. The old barn was a solid construction that had already existed on the property when Anthony's family acquired it, decades ago. The ground floor served as storage for old agricultural equipment, while the upper loft still contained bales of hay and straw for the animals. "I haven't been here in years," Anthony commented, looking around while shaking the water from his hair. "My father wanted to demolish this building, said it was a waste of space. He never allowed us to use it for anything important." Lucy took off her soaked hat, trying to control her hair, which now framed her face in damp curls. "Why? It seems like a solid structure." Anthony shrugged. "My father had many superstitions. He said this place brought bad luck to the family." A strong thunderclap sounded, making the walls of the barn groan as if to reinforce his words. Lucy smiled, despite the situation. "Looks like we're going to be stuck here for a while," she commented, observing the rain that now formed an impenetrable curtain outside. "There are worse things that could happen," Anthony replied with a smile that made her heart beat faster. He moved around the barn, finding an old oil lantern and lighting it, creating a cozy circle of golden light in the midst of the gloom. "Come, let's go up to the loft," he suggested. "There's dry straw up there. At least we can sit comfortably while we wait for the storm to pass." They climbed the wooden ladder that led to the upper floor. As Anthony had predicted, there were bales of clean, dry hay forming natural seats. They sat side by side, looking at the rain through a small window. "Thank you for the work you're doing," Anthony said after a few moments of comfortable silence. "Hank told me he's never seen anyone handle bees like you do. Said it's as if you speak their language." Lucy smiled, accepting the compliment. "It's a matter of observation and respect. Bees aren't aggressive by nature. They just protect what's theirs, like all of us." A silence followed, filled only by the sound of rain on the wooden roof and the occasional thunder that now seemed increasingly distant. "Lucy," Anthony began, his voice suddenly serious, "I know we promised to keep this strictly professional, but—" He hesitated, clearly struggling with the words. "But," she encouraged him, her heart speeding up in anticipation. "You deserve an explanation," he finally said, turning to face her directly, "about what happened, why I didn't show up that day." The air suddenly seemed heavier between them. 15 years of unanswered questions, of unresolved pain, hovering like a tangible presence. "You're right, I do deserve it," she agreed, surprising herself with the calmness in her voice. Anthony took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "The night before the wedding, my father called me to his office," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper. "He said he had something important to show me, something about the Miller families and about your father." Lucy felt a chill down her spine. What could her father have to do with all that? "He showed me documents," Anthony continued. "Documents that proved that the Miller farm, your family's property, had been purchased with money borrowed from the Montgomerys, a loan that was never repaid." Lucy frowned, confused. "That can't be true. My father never mentioned anything about a loan from your family." "I didn't believe it either at first," Anthony said, running his hand through his still damp hair. "But the documents were there, signed by your grandfather, dated 1970, when the lands were acquired." He paused, breathing deeply before continuing. "My father then gave me an ultimatum. If I married you, he would immediately execute the debt. Your family would lose everything: the farm, the house, the Miller legacy." Lucy felt as if the air had been ripped from her lungs. The revelation was so unexpected, so shocking, that for a moment she couldn't formulate a response. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "Why would he do that? He seemed to approve of our relationship. He even offered the stables for the wedding celebration." Anthony laughed bitterly. "My father was a master of manipulation, Lucy. He never truly approved of our relationship. He thought the Millers were socially beneath us, that I deserved a bride from a more prominent family." He stood up, agitated, pacing back and forth in the limited space of the loft. "When he saw that I was determined to marry you, he changed tactics. He decided to separate us in a way that I could never explain to you, a way that would make you hate me forever." Lucy processed each word, trying to fit this new narrative with the painful memories she had carried for so many years. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, the pain evident in her voice. "Why did you simply disappear, leave me waiting at the altar without a word, without an explanation?" Anthony stopped pacing, his eyes shining in the dim light of the lantern. "Because my father threatened not only to execute the debt, but to publicly expose your father," he said, the words coming out as if each one hurt him. "He had information that could destroy your family's reputation, that would make you and your father be publicly humiliated." "What kind of information?" Lucy asked, her heart beating painfully. Anthony hesitated, clearly reluctant to continue. "Your father, when he was young, he had problems with alcoholism, didn't he?" Lucy nodded slowly. It wasn't exactly a secret, although the family didn't openly talk about it. Her father had struggled with addiction when he was younger, but had been sober for decades when she was growing up. "My father had evidence of an accident that happened in 1982, continued Anthony. "An accident that your father caused while driving drunk. A child was seriously injured." Lucy felt the blood drain from her face. This was something she had never known, something her father had never mentioned. "The case was hushed up," explained Anthony. "My grandfather, who still ran the family business at the time, used his influence to make the problem disappear. That's when the loan for the purchase of the land was refinanced, with a secret clause giving the Montgomerys the right to execute the debt at any time. It was a form of control, of blackmail. The revelations fell upon Lucy like physical blows. Her father, her honorable and beloved father, carrying such a heavy secret all those years. And your father threatened to expose all of this if you married me, she concluded, the pieces finally fitting together. Yes, Anthony confirmed. He said he would destroy your father, your family, and leave you in misery. I was 24. Lucy! I was terrified, confused. I didn't know what to do. He moved closer again, sitting beside her on the hay bale. I decided it was better for you to hate me than to see your father destroyed, he said softly. I thought that eventually you would move on, find someone better than me. Silent tears began to roll down Lucy's face as she absorbed that painful truth. All those years believing she had been abandoned on a whim, out of cowardice, when in fact, 3 months later, your father, the accident? Anthony continued, his voice breaking. When I found out, I wanted to go to you, explain everything, but then I discovered you had left town, that you were in New York. I went to stay with an aunt, said Lucy, wiping away the tears. I couldn't bear to stay here, with all the memories, everyone looking at me with pity. Anthony nodded, understanding. In the years that followed, I thought about looking for you 1,000 times, but what could I say? How could I explain? And then when I finally learned that you had returned to the region, I was already married. That information caught her by surprise. Married? Anthony had gotten married. You got married? She asked, unable to hide the shock in her voice. He nodded, a sad smile on his lips. To Teresa Allen, the daughter of a friend of my father's. It was practically an arranged marriage. It lasted less than 2 years. Lucy didn't know what to feel in the face of this revelation. Jealousy, sadness, relief to know that the marriage had been brief. What happened? She asked. We realized we were completely incompatible, he replied simply. She wanted a life. Of parties and social events in New York or Boston. I wanted to stay here, run the stables, build something real. We separated amicably, actually. She's in Europe now, married to an Italian businessman. A silence followed, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, the rain turning into a gentle drizzle. And you? Anthony finally asked. Did you get married? Lucy hesitated, but decided he deserved the same honesty he had offered her. Yes, for a brief period, she replied. To a college colleague in New York, it didn't last even a year. What happened? It was his turn to ask. She shrugged, a gesture that tried to minimize the pain of that experience. He wasn't who I thought he was, she said simply. Or maybe I expected him to be someone he couldn't be. Anthony seemed to understand what she didn't say, that she had sought in another man what she had lost with him. I'm sorry, Lucy, he said quietly. For everything, for what my father did, for what I didn't have the courage to do, for all the years we lost. She looked at him in the golden light of the lantern, seeing not just the man who had broken her heart, but also someone who had suffered his own share of pain and disappointment. I'm sorry too, she replied sincerely, for your father, for the difficulties you're facing now. A moment of deep connection passed between them, a mutual recognition of lost time, of shared wounds. The rain seems to be passing, Anthony observed, looking through the small window. Lucy also looked. The sky was no longer so dark and the rain had diminished to a light drizzle. We can go back to the main house, he suggested. You're soaked. Miss Betsy can prepare a hot tea and maybe we can find some dry clothes for you. She nodded, suddenly aware of the discomfort of her wet clothes. They stood up and headed to the ladder, but before they could descend, Anthony gently held her arm. Lucy, he said, his voice low, intense, thank you for listening to me, for giving me the chance to explain after so long. She looked at him, at the man who had been her first and greatest love, at the man she now knew a little better. Thank you for finally telling me the truth, she replied. In that moment, standing at the top of the barn ladder with the golden lantern light illuminating their faces, something changed between them. An understanding, an unspoken forgiveness, perhaps the first step toward a new relationship, whatever its nature might be. They descended the ladder in silence and walked back to the main house under the fine drizzle, side by side, no longer as strangers connected only by a professional contract, but as two people who shared a painful past and, perhaps, a future to be rediscovered. At the main house, Miss Betsy received them with exclamations of concern upon seeing them soaked. Quickly, she arranged dry clothes for Lucy, a simple outfit that had belonged to Anthony's late mother and that miraculously fit her well. While changing in one of the guest rooms, Lucy felt her mind spinning with all the revelations from the barn. The truth about Anthony's abandonment at the altar was both liberating and disturbing. Liberating because she finally understood that she hadn't simply been discarded, that he had reasons, albeit questionable ones, for doing what he did. Disturbing because it opened a new series of questions about her father, about her family's past, about secrets that she might never have discovered if fate hadn't put Anthony back in her path. She came down the stairs and found Anthony in the living room, also in dry clothes, serving 2 cups of hot tea. There was a welcoming fire in the fireplace that drove away the dampness and cold brought by the storm. "Feeling better?" he asked upon seeing her. "Yes, thank you," she replied, accepting the cup he offered and sitting in an armchair near the fireplace. A comfortable silence established itself between them while they drank the tea, each lost in their own thoughts. "What do you intend to do now?" Anthony finally asked. "About your work here, I mean." Lucy pondered for a moment before responding. "I'll finish what I started. There are still 2 main swarms to remove and some smaller ones to check." He nodded, seeming relieved. "And what about the apiary proposal? Would you still be willing to consider it?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications that went far beyond a simple business partnership. "I need time, Anthony," she said honestly. "What you told me today changes a lot of things. I need to process all of this." "I understand," he replied without pressing. "Take all the time you need." They finished the tea in silence, each contemplating the possibilities that opened before them. When the rain finally stopped completely, Lucy announced she needed to go. "Can I borrow these clothes for now?" she asked, indicating the outfit she was wearing. "I'll return them washed the next time I come." "Of course," Anthony agreed. "Actually, I think they would look better on you. My mother would like to know they're being used after so many years in storage." There was a gentleness in his voice that warmed something inside her. "Thank you," she said, not just for the clothes, but for everything he had shared. He accompanied her to her truck, carrying the beekeeping equipment they had left in the barn. When everything was stored and she was ready to leave, Anthony surprised her with a question. "May I visit you at your house tomorrow?" he asked, a touch of hesitation in his voice. "I'd like to see your apiary if you don't mind, and maybe we can continue our conversation." Lucy felt her heart speed up. Part of her wanted to say no, to maintain the safe distance she had established. But another part, perhaps the braver one, wanted to explore this new dynamic between them, this possibility of healing and starting over. "Yes," she finally replied. "You can come. Around 5. I finish my work with the hives at that time." The Gia smile that lit up Anthony's face was like a ray of sunshine after the storm. "At 5 then," he confirmed. Lucy drove home with a strange feeling of lightness, as if a weight she had carried for 15 years had been partially removed from her shoulders. She didn't know exactly what the future held for her and Anthony, if there would be room for forgiveness, for friendship, or perhaps for something more. But for the first time in a long time, she felt curious about these possibilities, rather than fearing them. The next morning, Lucy woke up early as usual, but with a different energy. The revelations of the previous day still echoed in her mind, reorganizing memories, giving new meanings to past events. After breakfast, she decided she needed to check if there was any evidence of the story told by Anthony among her father's documents. She went to the small office on the side of the house, where she kept all the family papers in an old wooden chest. She spent hours there, meticulously examining deeds, contracts, receipts, yellowed by time. She was about to give up when she found, hidden in an envelope marked only with the date 1970, a document that made her heart stop for a moment. It was a loan contract, exactly as Anthony had described. Her grandfather, Gerald Miller, had indeed received a large sum of money from the Montgomery family to buy the farmlands, and there was indeed a clause that allowed immediate execution of the debt under certain circumstances. With the contract, she found a newspaper clipping dated 1982, reporting a car accident on the rural road that connected the main properties of the region. Her father's name wasn't directly mentioned, but there was a handwritten note in the margin, in handwriting she recognized as his. "May God forgive me." Silent tears ran down her face. Her father, the man she had always seen as an example of integrity, had carried this burden, this guilt, for so many years. Perhaps the alcoholism from which he had recovered had deeper and more painful roots than she had ever imagined. And then there was the question of the debt. If what Anthony had told her was true, and the documents she had just found seemed to confirm it, then the small property she had inherited from her father, the last piece of land that remained from the once prosperous Miller farm, was also under the shadow of that old debt. Was Anthony aware of this? Was this knowledge part of the reason for his renewed interest in her life? For the proposal of partnership in the apiary? The idea disturbed her. After everything they had shared in the barn during the storm, she wanted to believe in his sincerity, in the possibility of a new beginning based on truth and mutual respect. But distrust, cultivated over years of pain and abandonment, was not something she could simply discard. She carefully put away the documents and checked the clock. It was already past noon. She had lost the entire morning in her search. She still had work to do with her own hives before Anthony's visit at 5. She spent the following hours focused on her bees, finding familiar comfort in the routine of checking each hive, ensuring the queens were healthy, that honey production was on the right track. This was her domain, her place of safety and control. At 4:30, she put away her equipment and went into the house for a quick shower. She dressed simply, jeans, a fresh cotton blouse, comfortable sandals. She wasn't dressing to impress Anthony, she told herself. She just wanted to be presentable for a visit. At 5 o'clock sharp, she heard the sound of a vehicle approaching, but it wasn't the luxury pickup truck she expected. Instead, a modest Jeep entered her property, with Anthony at the wheel. He parked and got out, carrying a small basket. He wore simple clothes, jeans, short-sleeved shirt, work boots, looking more like an ordinary farmer than the heir of one of the most traditional families in the region. "I hope I'm not late," he said as he approached, a hesitant smile on his face. "Punctual as always," she replied, indicating the Jeep with a nod of her head. "Changed cars." Anthony looked at the used vehicle and smiled with a touch of embarrassment. "The pickup is just to impress clients and bankers," he admitted. "This old friend here is what I really use day to day." There was a disarming honesty in that admission that touched Lucy in an unexpected way. It was one more piece of the puzzle that was the new Anthony, so different from the image she had kept for so many years. "I brought something for our snack," he continued, extending the basket. "Miss Betsy insisted I couldn't come empty-handed." Lucy accepted the basket, smelling the familiar aroma of the old cook's treats. "Shall we sit on the porch?" she suggested. "Or would you prefer to see the apiary first?" "The apiary, please," he promptly replied, a genuine interest in his eyes. "I'm curious to see how you organize everything." She nodded, placing the basket on the porch table before guiding him along the path that led to her main apiary, situated at a strategic point on her property, surrounded by wildflowers and protected from strong winds by a small natural elevation of the terrain. As they approached, the constant buzzing of the bees became more noticeable. 30 hives organized in perfect rows, each painted in soft shades of blue and white, formed a spectacle that clearly impressed Anthony. "This is extraordinary," he commented, observing the meticulous operation. "How many hives do you have in total?" 52 at the moment," Lucy replied with evident pride in her voice. "For these 30 here, plus 12 near the orange orchard, and 10 new ones I'm establishing near the creek." Anthony looked at everything with genuine interest, asking pertinent questions about the organization of the apiary, the types of honey produced, the methods she used to ensure the health of the hives. "You really love this, don't you?" he observed after a few minutes. I do, she confirmed simply. There's something deeply satisfying about working with bees. They're organized, dedicated, each with its role in the grand scheme, and together, they create something truly wonderful. When she finished the tour of the apiary, Lucy guided Anthony back to the house, where she prepared a pot of herbal tea to accompany the treats Miss Betsy had sent. They sat on the porch, enjoying the gentle late afternoon breeze and the view of the fields stretching before them. Thank you for showing me your apiary, Anthony said, after a moment of comfortable silence. It's really impressive what you've built here. Thank you, she replied, feeling a warmth in her chest from the sincere recognition. It was a fresh start for me, after everything. Anthony nodded, understanding. I also had to start over, in my own way, he commented. When my father passed away and I discovered the extent of the problems he had left, I realized I would have to rebuild the stables almost from scratch. Lucy hesitated, unsure if she should mention what she had discovered that morning. But the need for honesty to finally bring everything to light after so many years of secrets and half-truths spoke louder. I found the documents today, she said, watching his reaction carefully. The loan contract you mentioned, and a newspaper clipping about the accident. Anthony remained motionless for a moment, his eyes fixed on the teacup in front of him. I see, he finally said. And what do you think about that? I don't know what to think, she admitted honestly. Part of me is shocked, sad to know that my father carried this guilt for so long. Part of me is still processing the fact that everything that happened between us was based on secrets that should never have existed. He nodded slowly. I was also shocked when my father showed me those documents the night before our wedding. I couldn't believe that our fathers, our grandfathers, had woven a web of secrets and debts that would end up affecting us so deeply. A thought suddenly occurred to Lucy. Do you still have those documents? The originals? Yes, they're in the family safe, he replied. Why? I'm wondering, and does the debt still exist, legally, I mean? Could you still... She hesitated, not wanting to verbalize the fear that had suddenly arisen. Anthony immediately realized where she was going with this, and his expression became serious. Are you asking if I could execute the debt? Take your property? She nodded, feeling vulnerable in exposing her fear. No, Lucy, he replied firmly, his eyes meeting hers. Actually, I took care of that a long time ago. What do you mean? She asked, confused. When I inherited everything, after my father's death, one of the first things I did was resolve this situation, he explained. Legally, I cancelled the debt. Your property is yours, free from any obligation to the Montgomery family. Lucy felt a wave of relief so intense that she almost felt dizzy. You did that? Why? Anthony shrugged, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Because it was the right thing to do, because that debt, that threat, had already caused enough damage. And because... He hesitated, looking at her with an intensity that made her hold her breath. Because I hoped that one day somehow our paths might cross again, and when that happened I wanted it to be without the weight of that debt between us. Lucy felt her eyes fill with tears. The idea that, even after everything that had happened, even after the failed marriage to another woman, Anthony still kept alive some hope of meeting her again, touched her heart in a way she hadn't expected. When I learned that you had returned to the region, I wanted to look for you immediately, he continued. But I thought I didn't have that right, that perhaps you had moved on, built a happy life without the complications our history brought. And then fate intervened, she murmured, in the form of a swarm of furious bees. A soft smile appeared on Anthony's lips. When Hank called me that day, saying that Thunder King had been attacked by bees and that a local woman had saved him, I didn't for a second imagine it would be you. It was like what? She encouraged when he hesitated. Like the universe was giving me a second chance I didn't deserve, he completed, his voice low, almost reverent. They were silent for a few moments, each absorbing the implications of that confession. The afternoon was advancing, the sun beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky with golden and orange hues. I have something to show you, Lucy finally said, standing up. Wait here a moment. She went into the house and returned minutes later with an old box, one of those used to keep photos. She sat down again beside Anthony and opened the box, revealing dozens of newspaper and magazine clippings. "What is this?" he asked, curious. "Your achievements," she replied simply. "Every prize Blue Ridge Stables won in the last 15 years. Every report about the success of your horses. Every interview you gave." Anthony looked astonished at the meticulously organized collection. Each clipping was dated, some already, yellowed by time. "You followed my life all this time?" he asked, his voice choked with emotion. Lucy nodded, feeling vulnerable in exposing this long-kept secret. "I couldn't help it," she admitted quietly. "Even in the years when I hated you the most, I always wanted to know how you were doing, what you were doing." He picked up one of the oldest clippings, a report about the first major international prize won by one of his horses, just a year after the wedding that never happened. "I looked for you at every event," he confessed, looking at the photo where he appeared much younger, smiling next to the award-winning horse. "I always hoped to see you among the audience, or to know that perhaps you had read about the achievement. It was as if each success wasn't complete without you knowing about it." The sun was touching the horizon now, bathing the porch with a golden light that seemed to sanctify that moment of such intimate confessions. Sitting side by side with the box of memories between them, it was as if the 15 years of separation were beginning to dissipate, leaving only the essential. Two hearts that, despite all circumstances, had never really forgotten each other. "What do we do now, Lucy?" Anthony asked softly, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sun was slowly disappearing. It was a simple question, but loaded with so many possibilities, so many different paths they could follow. "I don't know," she replied honestly. "There are 15 years of pain between us, Anthony. 15 years of separate lives, of choices made without each other, of distinct paths. But there's also something that survived all that," he argued, turning to face her. "Something that made you keep every clipping about me. Something that made me cancel that debt in the hope of finding you again someday." Lucy felt her heart accelerating. It was true, there was something that had survived the years, the hurts, the separations, something that even now pulsed between them like a living force. "We can start slow," she suggested, her voice barely more than a whisper. "One day at a time, no pressure, no expectations too great." Anthony's face lit up with a smile that reminded her of the young man she had fallen in love with so many years ago. "I would like that," he agreed. "Very much." A gentle breeze stirred Lucy's hair, bringing the scent of the wildflowers that surrounded her apiary. In that moment, she felt a peace she hadn't experienced in years, as if an old wound was finally beginning to heal. "We still have work to finish at the stable," she reminded him, seeking a practical, safe connection point. "The last swarms to remove. And the apiary proposal to consider," he added, with a hopeful gleam in his eyes. Lucy smiled, allowing herself to imagine just for a moment what it would be like to work side by side with Anthony, building something new together. "One step at a time," she repeated. Night had fallen completely when Anthony finally said goodbye. There were no hugs, no touches, just the silent recognition that something fundamental had changed between them, that a door both thought permanently closed had opened, if only a crack. In the days that followed, Lucy continued her work at Blue Ridge Stables, removing the last problematic swarms and installing controlled hives in strategic locations on the property, far enough from the stables to ensure the safety of the animals, but close enough to flowers and fresh water to thrive. The dynamic between her and Anthony had subtly changed. There was a mutual respect, a comfortable camaraderie that sometimes gave way to moments of almost palpable tension when their gazes met for a second too long, or when their fingers accidentally touched while examining a map of the property. On a particularly hot afternoon, when Lucy was finalizing the installation of the last controlled hive, Anthony appeared riding Thunder King. The magnificent chestnut stallion, completely recovered, moved with the natural grace that made him so valuable. "I thought he might like to thank you personally," said Anthony, dismounting with a fluid movement and leading the horse to where Lucy was working. She smiled, taking off her protective gloves and carefully approaching the animal. Thunder King recognized her immediately, extending his neck in her direction and softly snorting. "Hello, my friend," she said, stroking the horse's shiny coat. "I see you're feeling much better now." "Thanks to you," Anthony commented, observing the interaction with a smile. "The vet said he's never seen such a quick recovery from an attack of this magnitude." Lucy continued caressing the horse, enchanted with the connection that seemed to have formed between them. "Horses have extraordinary memory," she explained. "He knows I helped him in a time of need." "As do I," Anthony said quietly. Their gazes met, and for a moment, the world seemed to hang in suspension. There was so much unsaid between them, so many complicated feelings still to be unwrapped. "I finished the last hive," Lucy informed him, breaking the moment. "Officially, your bee problem is solved." A shadow of disappointment passed over Anthony's face. "Does that mean your work here is done?" he asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "The work I was hired for, yes," she replied cautiously. "But we still have to discuss the apiary proposal." His face lit up again. "Actually, I have some documents about that to show you. I did some research on the organic and specialized honey market. The possibilities are really promising." "I'd like to see them," she said, genuinely interested. "How about having dinner with me tonight?" he invited. "At the main house, we can review the documents and discuss the details." Part of Lucy wanted to pull back, to maintain the safe distance she had established. But another part, perhaps the stronger one, wanted to explore this new path that was opening before them. "All right," she agreed. "What time?" "At 7, he suggested. "I'll ask Miss Betsy to prepare something special." "It doesn't need to be anything elaborate," she protested. "It's not every day I can convince Lucy Miller to have dinner with me," he replied with a smile that accelerated her heart. When she arrived home that afternoon, she felt an almost adolescent anxiety about the dinner. It was ridiculous, she told herself. It was just a meal to discuss business. There was no reason to be choosing clothes as if it were a date, but it was impossible to deny that there was something more happening between them, something that went beyond a business proposal, beyond the resolution of old hurts, something that, despite all her efforts to ignore, grew with each day, each conversation, each shared look. At 7 o'clock sharp, she arrived at Blue Ridge Stables wearing a simple light blue dress, one of the few feminine pieces in her wardrobe dominated by practical work clothes. She had tied her hair in a loose bun and used makeup so light it was barely noticeable. Anthony was waiting for her on the porch, also dressed with simple elegance, light linen pants and a dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up at the forearms. His eyes lit up upon seeing her, and for a moment Lucy felt 23 again, arriving for dinner at her boyfriend's house. "You look beautiful," he said, descending the steps to receive her. "Thank you," she replied, feeling her cheeks warm. "I hope I'm not too casual." "You're perfect," he assured her, offering his arm to guide her. Instead of leading her to the formal dining room, Anthony surprised her by taking her to the back of the house, where a path illuminated by lanterns led to a small circular building that she didn't recall existing before. "What is this?" she asked, curious. "A project I started after my father passed away," he explained. "I wanted a more personal, more welcoming place than that huge house, something that was completely mine." As they approached, Lucy saw that it was a kind of garden pavilion, with glass walls that allowed a view of the cozy interior. A round table was set in the center, covered with a white tablecloth and illuminated by candles. Around it, shelves, with books and some photographs, created an intimate environment that resembled more a country cottage than the ostentatious luxury of the main mansion. "It's beautiful," she commented sincerely, enchanted with the space that seemed to reflect a side of Anthony she had never known. "I come here when I need to think, when the pressures of the stables become too much," he confessed, opening the door for her to enter. It's a refuge in a way. The interior was even cozier, with comfortable sofas in one corner, a small library in another, and the dining table in the center, from where one had a perfect view of the valley and the mountains in the background, now visible only as dark silhouettes against the starry sky. Miss Betsy had already served the first part of the dinner, a creamy pumpkin soup with fresh herbs that exhaled a delicious aroma. Anthony pulled out the chair for Lucy to sit and served white wine in delicate crystal glasses. "You really didn't need to do all this," she said, looking around, genuinely touched by the effort he had made. "I wanted this dinner to be special," he replied simply, sitting across from her. They talked with surprising ease while dining. Anthony showed her market research on specialized honey, data on the growing demand for organic products, ideas for an exclusive line that could be developed on the stables land. Lucy found herself genuinely excited about the possibilities. Her skills and knowledge in beekeeping, combined with Anthony's land and resources, could create something truly unique. When dessert was served, a delicate honey pudding made especially for the occasion, the partnership proposal was practically accepted. "We would need to define the exact terms, of course," she commented, tasting the pudding. "I'm thinking something like 60-40, considering that the technical knowledge is mine, but the land and a significant part of the investment would come from you." "I was thinking more like 50-50, Anthony countered, "a true partnership in every sense." There was something in his tone, in his look, that suggested he was talking about more than just the honey business. Lucy felt her heart speed up, unsure how to respond. 50-50 seems fair, she finally agreed, maintaining the professional tone. "We can ask your lawyer to prepare a preliminary contract for us to review." Anthony nodded, but there was a shadow of disappointment in his eyes, as if he had hoped she would catch another message in his words. After finishing dessert, he invited her to sit on one of the comfortable sofas, where he presented more details of his vision for the joint business. While he spoke, excited about the possibilities, Lucy noticed a framed photo on a small side table. It was an old photo from the time when they were dating. They were both on horseback, laughing at the camera, young and in love, with no idea what the future held. She picked up the frame, surprised that he had kept that memory. "You kept this?" she asked, interrupting what he was saying about packaging techniques for premium honey. Anthony stopped mid-sentence, looking at the photo in her hands. A melancholic smile appeared on his lips. "It was the only personal item I took when I left. The main house to live here," he admitted. "Even during my brief marriage, I could never get rid of it. I kept it hidden, of course, but I could never throw it away." Lucy looked again at the photograph, at the smiling young people who had no idea of the trials they would face. Something moved inside her, a deep and complex emotion that she couldn't completely name. "We were so young," she murmured, "and so certain that our love would last forever," he completed, moving to sit beside her on the sofa. They were close now, their shoulders almost touching. Lucy could feel his warmth, his familiar scent that brought back so many memories. "Anthony," she began, unsure of what she wanted to say. "I still feel the same, Lucy," he gently interrupted. Her, his green eyes fixed on hers with an almost painful intensity. "All these years, all the mistakes, all the wrong choices, nothing changed what I feel for you." Her heart was beating so hard it seemed about to jump out of her chest. Vert of her wanted to retreat, to protect herself from the potential for more pain. But another part, perhaps the braver one, wanted to dive into this possibility, this second chance that seemed to be offered to both of them. "I've been so afraid for so long," she confessed, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Afraid to trust, to believe, to allow myself to feel again." "I know," he replied, daring to gently touch her hand, "and I don't have the right to ask you to overcome that quickly. I just want the chance to show, day by day, that the man I am now is worthy of your trust, that I would never hurt you again no matter what happens." A solitary tear ran down Lucy's face. All the contained emotion of 15 years, all the unanswered questions, all the pain and the longing, seemed to crystallize in that single moment of shared vulnerability. Slowly, as if moved by a force beyond her conscious will, she leaned toward him. Anthony understood the gesture and eliminated the distance between them, sealing their lips in a gentle, almost hesitant kiss. It was like coming home after a long and exhausting journey, familiar and new at the same time, loaded with memories and yet full of unexplored promises. When they separated, Both had tears in their eyes and trembling smiles on their lips. "One day at a time," she suggested, repeating what she had said days ago. "One day at a time," he agreed, holding her hand as if it were the most precious of treasures. In the weeks that followed, Lucy and Anthony established a routine that combined work and rediscovery. During the day, they focused on establishing the commercial apiary on the stables land, choosing the best locations for the new hives, discussing management techniques, planning the future product line. In the evenings and weekends, they allowed themselves to explore the rebirth of their personal relationship. Quiet dinners in Anthony's pavilion, long conversations on Lucy's porch, horseback rides through the fields that connected their properties. Each day brought new revelations, pieces of the puzzle of their separate lives that now began to form a new image. Anthony told her about the crushing pressure he had felt upon taking control of the stables after his father's death, about the sleepless nights trying to find solutions to problems that seemed unsolvable, about the loneliness that not even his brief marriage had been able to alleviate. Lucy, in turn, shared the difficult years after her father's death, the struggle to keep the small property, the failures and successes in establishing her honey business, the gradual discovery that beekeeping was not just a means of survival, but a true vocation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to hit like and especially to subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out, now continuing 1 month after they had officially started their business partnership. The first hives of the new joint venture were already thriving. The lawyer had finalized the contract, formalizing the 50-50 partnership they had agreed upon, and Lucy was spending almost as much time at the stables as at her own property. On a sunny afternoon, while they were inspecting the newly installed hives near a lavender field that Anthony had planted specifically for the bees, Hank appeared running, visibly agitated. "Boss, Mrs. Lucy," he called, approaching breathlessly. "We just received a call from New York. It's National Bank." Anthony visibly paled. National Bank was his main creditor, the one that held most of the mortgages on the stable's lands. "What do they want, Hank?" he asked, his voice tense. "They said if you can't regularize the overdue payments by the end of the month, they'll foreclose on the West Sector mortgage, the sector where we're just installing the new hives," Lucy observed, the expression of despair that took over Anthony's face. He had mentioned financial difficulties, of course, but in recent days, with the enthusiasm for the new venture, these concerns seemed to have taken a back seat. "How much time do we have exactly?" Anthony asked the foreman. 15 days, boss. They said this time they won't extend the deadline no matter what you offer." When Hank moved away, Anthony ran his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration that Lucy already knew well. "I thought we had more time," he murmured. "The first profits from the apiary will only come in a few months, at the minimum." "How much do you need?" Lucy asked directly. He hesitated, clearly reluctant to share the extent of his financial problems. "Anthony, we're partners now," she insisted. "In every sense. I can't help if I don't know the complete truth." He sighed deeply, his expression defeated. $200,000. It's the amount of the overdue payments plus the interest and penalties that have accumulated. It was a significant sum, especially considering that the entire initial investment in the apiary had been $150,000 divided between them. "I have some savings," Lucy began. "No," he interrupted firmly. "This is not your responsibility, Lucy. I won't compromise your future, your financial security, for mistakes I made or that my father made before me. But our business, we'll find another place for the hives," he said, trying to sound confident. "There are other areas of the stables that aren't mortgaged." But Lucy knew from what he himself had explained days before that the West Sector was ideal for the bees precisely because it was away from the stables, had easy access to water, and was adjacent to the wildflower fields that would provide high-quality honey. They returned to the main house in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The news had cast a shadow over the optimism of recent days. More than the practical issue of the apiary, Lucy was concerned about the impact that another setback would have on Anthony, who had only recently begun to regain confidence in himself and in the future. That night, after returning to her own house, Lucy made a decision. The next day, very early, she drove to the neighboring town, where the regional bank branch with which she had been doing business for years was located. She had a small investment. There, savings from a lifetime of hard work that she had reserved for emergencies or for her eventual retirement. The manager, Mr. Oliveira, received her with the familiarity of someone who had known her since she was a girl. "Mrs. Lucy, what a pleasant surprise. How can I help you today?" "I need to liquidate my investment fund, Richard," she said directly. "All $130,000. The manager's eyes widened, visibly surprised. "The entire amount? Are you sure? It's your safety reserve." "I'm sure," she confirmed. "And I need to know what my options are to complement this amount. I need $200,000 in total." Mr. Oliveira frowned, concerned. "Mrs. Lucy, if I may ask, are you having some problem? Some health issue in the family?" "No, Richard, nothing like that," she smiled to reassure him. "I'm making an investment, a very important investment for me." After analyzing her financial situation, the bank offered a complimentary loan of $70,000 using her small property as collateral. It was risky, Lucy knew that. If the honey business failed, she could lose everything she had. But something inside her, a deep and inexplicable certainty, told her it was worth taking that risk. When she returned to Blue Ridge Stables late that afternoon, she found Anthony in his office, surrounded by papers and with an expression that mixed weariness and determination. He was so absorbed that he didn't hear her enter. "Found any solution?" she asked, making him raise his head, surprised. "Lucy, I didn't know you were coming today." "I asked if you found a solution," she insisted, approaching the desk. He sighed, running his hand over his face in a gesture of fatigue. "I'm trying, but it's difficult. I've already sold almost everything that could be sold. What's left are the horses, and even if I sold some, it wouldn't be enough in the time we have." Lucy placed the envelope she was carrying on the desk in front of him. "What is this?" Anthony asked, confused. $200,000, she replied simply, "enough to pay the arrears and keep the West Sector." He looked from the envelope to her, incredulous. "Lucy, no," he began, but she interrupted him. "It's not a gift, Anthony. It's an additional investment in our partnership. I'm increasing my participation in the business to 60-40, as I originally proposed." He stood up, visibly disturbed. "I can't accept this. It's too much money. It's your future." "It's our future," she corrected, keeping her voice firm. "As you said, a true partnership in every sense." Anthony looked at her with a mixture of emotions so intense it was almost impossible to distinguish each one. Gratitude, admiration, concern, and something deeper, more fundamental. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Why would you do this for me after everything?" Lucy took a deep breath, gathering the courage to say what her heart already knew for weeks, perhaps even for years. "Because I love you, Anthony," she said simply. "I never stopped loving you, not even when I thought I hated you. It's as if a part of me always knew that one day we would be here, rebuilding what was broken." He came around the desk and embraced her in a hug so tight it almost left her breathless. She could feel his heart beating furiously against her own, the slight tremor in his strong arms. "I love you too, Lucy," he murmured against her hair. "I always have, even in the darkest moments when I thought I would never see you again, that I had lost any chance of true happiness. It was always you." When their lips met, there was no more hesitation, nor the almost reverent care of the first kiss weeks. Hago. There was urgency, passion, the mutual recognition of a love that had transcended time, distance, and even hurt. Later that night, while sharing a simple meal in Anthony's pavilion, they began to make concrete plans for the future. With Lucy's money, they would be able to stabilize the financial situation of the stables enough to give the apiary the time needed to start generating profits. "We'll have to be very judicious with expenses in the coming months," Anthony commented, examining the numbers they had calculated. "No extravagances, every dollar invested must have a clear return." "I agree," said Lucy, appreciating the pragmatic and responsible side he was showing. It was further evidence of how he had matured. Over the years, of how difficulties had molded him into a man different from the impulsive young man she had known. They were discussing options to optimize production costs when someone knocked on the pavilion door. It was Hank, looking agitated again. "Sorry to interrupt, boss, but something strange happened. We were organizing some old documents in the basement of the main house, as you asked, and we found this box addressed to you." He extended an old wooden box, darkened by time, with Anthony's name carved on the lid. "How strange," commented Anthony, taking the box with curiosity. "I've never seen this before." "It was hidden behind a false wall, boss," explained Hank. "We only found it because part of the basement lining collapsed from the humidity." After Hank left, Anthony carefully examined the box. "It looks very old," Lucy observed, intrigued. "And this carving," Anthony murmured, passing his fingers over his name on the lid. "I recognize the style. It was my grandfather, August. He liked to work with wood in his leisure moments." Carefully, he opened the box. Inside were several old documents, yellowed by time, and a sealed envelope with the Montgomery family crest, addressed simply to my grandson, Anthony. "It's my grandfather's handwriting," Anthony said, surprised, carefully opening the envelope. Inside, he found several handwritten pages, dated 1985, 3 years before old August's death. As Anthony read in silence, his expression changed from curiosity to shock, and finally to deep sadness. "What does it say?" Lucy asked gently when he finally lowered the pages, visibly shaken. "It's a confession," he replied, his voice choked. "A story that dates back to before even my birth, before even my father's birth." With trembling hands, he passed the pages to Lucy, who began to read the elegant and firm handwriting. "My dear grandson Anthony, if you are reading these words, it means I didn't have the courage to tell you personally what I now confess in these pages. It's a story of love, betrayal, and redemption that began almost half a century ago, when I was still a young farmer and met the most extraordinary woman who ever set foot in this valley. Helen Miller, your maternal grandmother. Helen was the daughter of a small landowner neighboring our own. We fell desperately in love, against the will of our families, who had other ambitions for us. When we announced our intention to marry, my father threatened to disinherit me, and her father reacted with equal fury. In our youthful innocence, we planned to run away, to build a life away from family conflicts. But on the eve of our escape, something terrible happened. Your great-grandfather, my father, discovered our plans and, in a fit of rage, confronted Helen's father. There was a fight, and in the heat of the moment, my father threatened to ruin the Miller family. Frightened by the consequences of our love, I did something I regretted for the rest of my life. I abandoned Helen without explanation and gave in to my father's pressure to marry the daughter of a wealthy coffee farmer, Eliza, who would become your paternal grandmother. What I didn't know at the time, and only discovered years later, was that Helen was pregnant when I abandoned her. She hastily married a young doctor from town, George Allen, who agreed to take the child as his own. That child was your mother, Anthony. Years passed, and when I finally discovered the truth, my father had already passed away. I already had 2 children with Eliza, including your father, and Helen was living in another state with her family. Guilt and remorse consumed me, and, in a desperate attempt to compensate for my mistake, I used my influence to financially help the Miller family, always anonymously. It was at this time that I created the famous loan for the purchase of the lands that now belong to the Millers. There was never a real loan, Anthony. It was my way of trying to repair the harm I had caused, of ensuring that Helen's family had security. The documents were created only to justify the transfer of money, but I never intended to collect a single cent. Fate has strange ways of operating, my grandson. When you and Lucy Miller began dating, I felt as if the universe was offering a chance for redemption. 2 young people in love, somehow reconnecting 2 families that should have joined decades earlier. Unfortunately, your father discovered the loan documents and, unaware of the true story, came to see them as an instrument of power over the Millers. I fear he may use this information to interfere in your happiness with Lucy, just as my own. Father interfered in mine with Helen. If this happens, I implore you to be stronger than I was. Don't let family pride or petty ambitions separate you from whom you truly love. Don't make my mistake, Anthony. Don't spend your entire life carrying the weight of a cowardly choice, dreaming of what might have been. The attached documents prove the truth about the loan and invalidate any attempt to execute it. Use them if necessary to protect your happiness and that of the Miller family. With love and hope for your forgiveness, your grandfather, August Montgomery. When Lucy finished reading, silent tears were streaming down her face. The story was so unexpected, so deeply connected to her own life, that it seemed almost unreal. This means that, she began, unable to complete the sentence. That we're second cousins, Anthony completed, still processing the revelation. That our families have always been connected, despite all appearances to the contrary. Did your father know about this? Lucy asked, trying to organize her thoughts. I doubt it, Anthony replied, examining the other documents in the box. If he knew, he would have used it against us somehow. No, I think he found only the loan documents, without knowing the story behind them. Among the papers they found birth certificates, love letters never sent, and more importantly, an official declaration signed and notarized, completely annulling any debt the Millers had to the Montgomerys. My grandfather really tried to correct his mistake, Anthony murmured, holding the document with reverence. And somehow, he predicted that his own son might use this to separate us. But it came too late, Lucy observed sadly. Your father had already used the threat. You had already left me at the altar. And we lost 15 years, Anthony completed, the pain evident in his voice. They were silent for a few moments, absorbing the implications of that extraordinary revelation. It was as if fate had drawn an elaborate circle, bringing them back to each other against all odds. What do we do now? Lucy finally asked. Anthony took her hands in his eyes shining with renewed determination. Exactly what my grandfather hoped we would do, he replied firmly. We don't repeat the mistakes of the past. We don't allow anything else to separate us. We build our future together, as it should have been from the beginning. That night they slept side by side for the first time in 15 years, not consumed by physical passion, but united by a deeper understanding of their own history, of how their destinies had been intertwined for generations long before they were even born. The next morning, Anthony went to the bank with Lucy's money and the documents found in his grandfather's box. He not only regularized the West Sector situation, but also used the official declaration to contest other debts that his father had, created using the false loan as collateral. In the weeks that followed, they worked tirelessly on the apiary, expanding it beyond the West Sector, creating new production points in strategic locations on the property. The discovery of August's box seemed to have released not just a financial weight, but also a creative energy that propelled the project forward with renewed strength. It was Lucy who had the idea of establishing hives near the lavender fields, which Anthony had originally planted just to create a natural barrier between the stables and the grazing areas. The honey produced there, they discovered with surprise and delight, had special properties, an unmistakable lavender aroma, but with additional notes from the wildflowers that grew naturally in the valley. When the first batch of valley lavender honey was produced, they sent samples to specialists and potential buyers. The response was immediate and enthusiastic. A famous chef from New York offered to buy the entire initial production for his starred restaurants. A natural cosmetics company got in touch, interested in using the honey for an exclusive line of skin products. But it was Hank's unexpected discovery that really changed the course of the business. The foreman noticed that the stable's horses, especially those that grazed near the lavender hives, seemed remarkably calmer and healthier. Intrigued, Anthony asked the veterinarian to investigate the phenomenon. It's fascinating, explained Dr. Paul after a few weeks of observation. It seems that the combination of the lavender aroma with the constant presence of bees is creating a therapeutic effect on the animals. Their stress level is significantly lower, and this is reflected in various health indicators. Anthony and Lucy looked at each other, an idea forming simultaneously in their minds. What if we expanded this? Lucy suggested, excited. Not just producing honey, but developing a method of harmonious coexistence between bees and horses that benefits both The idea was revolutionary. Traditionally, bees and horses were kept as far apart as possible due to the risk of attacks. But what they were discovering suggested that, under controlled conditions and with the right species of bees, not only was coexistence possible, but potentially beneficial. In the months that followed, they carefully documented their experience, refined the techniques, expanded the lavender fields, and developed a unique system that allowed horses and bees to share the same space safely and mutually beneficially. When they published their first article in a specialized equine culture magazine, the community's reaction was mixed, skepticism and curiosity in equal parts. But when horse breeders from across the country began visiting Blue Ridge stables to see the results for themselves, skepticism quickly gave way to admiration. The Miller-Montgomery integrated beekeeping method, as it became known, began to be implemented in other breeding farms, always under the direct consultancy of Lucy and Anthony. Orders for the special lavender honey increased exponentially, soon exceeding the production capacity of the original apiary. 1 year after the start of their partnership, Blue Ridge Stables had not only paid off all outstanding debts, but was generating significant profits with the new integrated operation of equine culture and beekeeping. Thunder King, now retired, from competitions, became the most sought-after stallion in the country, not only for his superior lineage, but also for the exceptionally balanced temperament he developed living near the lavender hives. On a golden October afternoon, exactly 18 months after Lucy had saved Thunder King from the furious swarm, she and Anthony walked hand in hand through the lavender field that now extended for several acres, creating a purple carpet that gently undulated in the breeze. "I never imagined we would come so far in such a short time," she commented, observing the perfectly aligned hives and the horses grazing peacefully nearby, showing no sign of stress from the presence of the bees. "I always knew that together we would be capable of great things," Anthony replied, stopping to embrace her. "Since we were teenagers, I felt we had something special, something that went beyond a simple romance." Lucy smiled, resting her head on his chest, feeling the constant and comforting beat of his heart. "Do you think your grandfather knew," she asked, "that one day we would find the box, discover the truth?" "I think he hoped so," Anthony replied thoughtfully. "He was a man who believed in the justice of time, in how circles eventually close. In his letter, he spoke of redemption, of a second chance for our families." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink that reflected on the intense purple of the lavender, creating a spectacle of colors that seemed to celebrate life itself. "I have something for you," Anthony said, softly, taking a small box from his pocket. Lucy's heart sped up as she recognized the old box, a Montgomery family heirloom. It was the same one he had shown her 15 years ago, when he had first asked for her hand in marriage. "Anthony," she murmured, moved. He knelt in the lavender field, the bees buzzing peacefully around them like silent witnesses to that moment. "Lucy Miller, you gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. You transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. You allowed me to correct the biggest mistake I ever made." He opened the box, revealing the same diamond and sapphire ring that had belonged to his grandmother, Eliza. "I know this ring brings complex memories for both of us. The last time I offered it to you, fate had other plans. But today I want it to symbolize not just our future, but also the reconciliation of the past, the healing of old wounds, the closing of a circle that began long before we were born." Silent tears streamed down Lucy's face as he continued. "Will you marry me, Lucy? Be my partner in life as you already are in business. Build with me the family our grandparents should have built, that we should have started 15 years ago." With her heart overflowing with love, Lucy extended her hand, allowing him to slide the ring onto her finger, a ring laden with history, with mistakes and redemptions, with broken circles finally closed. "Yes," she replied simply, her voice choked with emotion. "Now and always, yes." They sealed the promise with a kiss as the sun set on the horizon and the bees continued their tireless work around them, patiently and dedicatedly creating something sweet and precious, just as they themselves had done with their rediscovered love. On a sunny spring Saturday, Lucy Miller finally walked to the altar to find Anthony Montgomery waiting for her, exactly 16 years after the wedding that never happened. The ceremony was held in the small chapel on the property, restored especially for the occasion, with only close friends and loyal employees as guests. Miss Betsy, now with completely white hair, cried openly in the front row, repeatedly murmuring that she had always known they were destined for each other. Hank, proud, in his new suit, was responsible for walking Lucy down the aisle, assuming the role that would have been her father's. Thunder King, adorned with lavender flowers, was tied outside the chapel, as if he too wanted to participate in that moment, which in a way he had helped create. After the ceremony, a festive lunch was served in the gardens of the main house, where tables decorated with honey in artisanal jars and lavender arrangements created an environment that celebrated not just the couple's union, but also the extraordinary partnership they had built. As a wedding gift, Hank and the other employees had prepared a surprise, a carved wooden sign that would be fixed at the main entrance to the stables, now officially renamed Blue Ridge Stables and Valley Apiary, a celebration of the union. Not just of two people, but of two vocations, two families, two stories that finally intertwined, as they always should have done. As they danced their first waltz as husband and wife, under the stars that were beginning to appear in the early evening sky, Anthony whispered in Lucy's ear, "Everything happens at the right time, doesn't it? Even if it took us 15 years. To understand that." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder, feeling complete as never before. Perhaps we needed those years to become the right people, to create the perfect conditions for our love to truly flourish. Like the bees and the lavender, he observed with a smile. A delicate balance, a careful dance, that when it finds the right rhythm creates something extraordinarily sweet. And as they gently twirled to the sound of the music, surrounded by friends who had witnessed their journey and by the living legacy of their joint work, Lucy and Anthony felt not just reconciled with each other, but also with their past, with the complex history of their families, and with the destiny that, despite all the detours and obstacles, had finally brought them to where they always should have been together, creating something sweet and precious from the most unlikely circumstances, just like the bees that had united their worlds. The end. Dear listeners, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and especially subscribe to the channel. Share in the comments if you've ever experienced a reunion that changed your life, and if you believe that destiny always leads us to where we should be. Your company means a lot to us,